You know the story of Abraham Lincoln's life, and of course, his tragic death. But what if I told you that wasn't the end of his story? What if I told you that years after he was laid to rest, a gang of criminals cooked up a plan for one last, unbelievable act, to steal his body and hold it for ransom to everyone? Welcome back to History with K. You know the story of Abraham Lincoln? The legendary president who led the country through its darkest days and whose tragic death still echoes in history. But what if I told you that wasn't the end of his story? What if I told you that just years after his death, a gang of criminals cooked up one of the most audacious plans in American history? In this video, we're diving into one of the wildest and most bizarre heists you've probably never heard of. The plan to steal the body of Abraham Lincoln. From counterfeiters to corrupt criminals, and a grave-robbing plot so unbelievable, it could have been ripped straight from a Hollywood script. So buckle up, because this is one history lesson you won't want to miss. This isn't some Hollywood movie. This is the bizarre, true story of what might be America's strangest and most audacious heist, a chapter of history that's been almost completely forgotten. Forget robbing banks. These guys tried to rob a grave, Abraham Lincoln's grave. Our story really kicks off in the criminal underworld of 1870s Chicago. The city was buzzing with illegal activity, and a huge part of that was counterfeiting. During the Civil War, the government started printing paper money, greenbacks, and almost immediately, crooks started printing their own. Imagine reaching into your pocket and knowing that every other dollar bill could be a worthless fake. It got so bad that the government created a brand new agency to fight it, the United States Secret Service. And no, their first job wasn't protecting the president. It was protecting the money. At the top of one of Chicago's most successful counterfeiting rings was a man named James Big Jim Kennelly. Kennelly was your classic crime boss. His whole operation hinged on the genius of one man, Benjamin Boyd. If Kennelly's criminal enterprise was a speeding train, Boyd was the engine, churning out flawless, counterfeit bills. He wasn't just a counterfeiter, he was an artist, and he considered him the best counterfeit plate engraver in the world. His fake bills were so perfect, they were practically undetectable. But in 1875, that engine seized up. After a long chase, the Secret Service finally nabbed Benjamin Boyd and slapped him with a 10-year sentence in the state penitentiary. For Big Jim Kennelly, this was a catastrophe. With Boyd locked up, the river of high-quality funny money ran dry, and his empire started to crumble. He was getting desperate. Couldn't just bust Boyd out of prison. The man would be a fugitive. Kennelly needed a bargaining chip so powerful, so unthinkable, that the authorities would have no choice but to fold. A full pardon from the governor. But how do you get a governor to pardon one of the country's most infamous criminals? You need leverage. Something so valuable, so shocking, the authorities would have no choice but to play ball. He needed a hostage the entire country would pay to get back. So, in the back room of a Chicago saloon called The Hub, Kennelly and his top guys, a bartender named Terrence Mullen and a nickel counterfeiter named Jack Hughes, hatched their plan. It was a plan so disrespectful it was almost brilliant. They were going to steal the body of Abraham Lincoln. Just 11 years after his assassination, Lincoln was already a sacred figure in America. He was buried in a grand tomb in Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois. The plan seemed simple enough. They'd break into the tomb, grab Lincoln's 500-pound cedar and lead coffin, and haul it off in a wagon. From there, they'd transport the body over 200 miles to the sand dunes of northern Indiana, burying it where the shifting sands would make it impossible for anyone else to find. Once the nation was spiraling into a full-blown panic over the missing president, they'd lay out their demands: a full pardon and release for their master engraver, Benjamin Boyd, and, just for good measure, $200,000 in cash. That's over $5 million today. They even picked the perfect night for the job, November 7th, 1876. It was the night of a tense presidential election, and they figured everyone in Springfield would be glued to the telegraph offices, waiting for the results. Nobody would be paying attention to a quiet cemetery on the edge of town. The plan was set. The crew was ready. But there was a tiny problem. For all their criminal know-how, neither Mullen nor Hughes had any experience in, well, grave robbing. It's a niche field. They needed a specialist. someone who knew their way around a cemetery after dark. They put the word out and were soon introduced to a man named Louis Swegels. Swegels had a reputation as a career criminal and claimed to be an experienced body snatcher, or ghoul, as they called them. He seemed like the perfect final piece of the puzzle. But Swegels was a wolf in sheep's clothing. This is where the story pivots from a daring crime caper to an absolute comedy of errors. It was what crooks back then called a roper, a paid informant for the Secret Service. It was as if the criminals had hired a fox to help them plan their raid on the henhouse. From the very first meeting, Swegels fed every single detail of the plot back to his boss, Patrick Tyrrell, the head of the Chicago Secret Service. A twist of fate, Tyrrell was the very same agent who had arrested Benjamin Boyd in the first place. Now decided not to just arrest the plotters. He was going to let the heist move forward and catch them red-handed in the very act of desecrating Lincoln's tomb. He informed Lincoln's only living son, Robert Todd Lincoln, of the bizarre plot, and with his blessing, Tyrrell laid a trap. As Mullen, Hughes, and their new expert Swegels boarded a train to Springfield, a team of Secret Service agents and hired Pinkerton detectives were on the exact same train, watching their every move. Stories like this are a perfect reminder. That history is packed with bizarre, unbelievable events you've probably never heard of. If you get a kick out of uncovering these forgotten chapters, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell too, so you don't miss our next dive into the weirdest moments from the past. On the night of November 7th, 1876, the stage was set for a historic crime. While Springfield buzzed with election news, Mullen and Hughes, led by their mole Swegels, crept into the deserted Oak Ridge Cemetery. Hiding inside the tomb in the pitch-black darkness were Secret Service agent Tyrrell and his detectives, ready to spring the trap. The incompetence of the would-be body snatchers was obvious from the get-go. They got to the tomb door only to realize that neither of them knew how to pick a lock. They had to waste precious time slowly sawing through the padlock with a file, the scraping noise echoing through the silent cemetery. Once inside, they hit their next snag, the white marble sarcophagus. Prying the heavy lid off was a massive struggle. When they finally got it open, they saw the prize, Lincoln's coffin. But their troubles were far from over. The coffin weighed around 500 pounds and was way too heavy for two guys to just pick up and carry. After a huge effort, they only managed to drag it about 15 inches from its base. Exhausted, Mullen told Swegels to go get the wagon he'd supposedly arranged and bring it to the tomb door. This was the signal. Swegels walked out of the tomb, and instead of grabbing a wagon, he gave the alert to Tyrrell and the waiting agents. The trap was about to be sprung. The agents slipped off their shoes for silence and crept toward the burial chamber, revolvers drawn. They were about to burst in and be heroes. But in the total darkness, one of the detectives' pistols went off by accident. The loud bang sent everyone into a panic. Mullen and Hughes, who had stepped just outside the tomb, heard the shot and knew the game was up. They bolted into the night and vanished through the cemetery gates. Meanwhile, the lawmen descended into utter chaos. It was like a scene from a slapstick comedy, except the props were loaded guns. Hearing that first shot, the other detectives assumed the grave robbers were firing at them and started shooting back into the darkness. For a few terrifying moments, the Secret Service agents and the Pinkerton detectives were in a gunfight asterisk with each other asterisk, their bullets whizzing through the memorial chamber. Miraculously, nobody was hit. By the time they figured out their mistake, the actual criminals were long gone. The agents stormed the tomb only to find it empty except for the partially moved coffin. The great Lincoln heist was foiled, not by brilliant police work, but by a clumsy finger and pure incompetence. Mullen and Hughes made it back to Chicago, thinking they were home free. 10 days later, agents found them at their usual hangout, the Hub Saloon, and arrested them without a fight. Their trial was a media sensation, but the public's horror ran into a bizarre legal snag. It was like trying to prosecute a computer hacker before laws against hacking even existed. At the time, Illinois had no specific law making grave robbery a felony. The best prosecutors could do was charge them with conspiracy and attempting to steal the coffin itself, which was valued at just $75. After all the drama, They were found guilty and sentenced to only 1 year in state prison. The botched heist sent a shockwave through those sworn to protect Lincoln's legacy. His son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was appalled at how close the ghouls had come. For years, the tomb's custodian, John Carroll Power, secretly moved the coffin to different hiding spots within the tomb, including a shallow, unmarked grave in the basement, just to keep it safe. Finally, in 1901, Robert Lincoln decided to end the threat for good. In a private ceremony, Lincoln's coffin was dug up one last time. It was opened for a small group of 23 witnesses to verify the contents and put to rest. Any rumors that the body had been swapped? They reported that Lincoln's face was still perfectly recognizable, though it had taken on a bronze-like color. Then, workers lowered the coffin into a 10-foot deep vault, surrounded it with a cage of thick steel bars, and poured tons of wet concrete over the entire thing. They weren't just burying a president. They were locking a national treasure inside. A fortress of stone, sealing it forever from the outside world. After being moved an estimated 17 times since his death, Abraham Lincoln was finally, truly, at rest. The plot to steal Abraham Lincoln's body is still one of the strangest footnotes in American history. It was a bizarre cocktail of greed, desperation, and mind-boggling ineptitude that aimed to hold a national hero's remains for ransom. It was a crime born in the world of counterfeiters that ultimately forced Lincoln's tomb to become a fortress. The greatest heist you've never heard of failed, ensuring the 16th president would remain safe from any more ghouls, schemers, or fools. But it does make you wonder, what do you think is the most bizarre or audacious crime in history? Let me know. Your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks for watching.